My name is Per. I'm a data scientist and experimentation specialist at Signific, and I've been working with Polestar since August last year, so closing in on a year now after summer. But I previously worked with experimentation and data science and analytics in general, I guess, at Sveriges Radio, so the Swedish public radio, and Paradox Interactive. And who are we then from Signific? So we are a small consultancy consisting of 14 data nerds based in Stockholm, and we specialize within growth methodologies and anything data really to help organizations sort of transform into becoming a more learning organization or learn faster from the data that they have and their users and customers. So that is us. But more importantly, we have our special guest today, which is Oliver from Polestar. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Per. Hi, everyone. As Per said, my name is Oliver Wyman. I'm working with experimentation at Polestar, and I've been doing that for about the last 2 years. Previously, I was also in an experimentation role for about another 2 years before this, so in the space for about 4 years. Before that, I was working in marketing in both the financial and clean tech sectors here in Sweden and back home in Australia. I also do a bit of teaching, so taking parts of the experiment design courses within data analytics at Hyper Island and the Institute of Higher Marketing at NIC.
Yeah, so the agenda for today, as I said, we will basically run through our journey and experience, covering roughly 2 years, I guess, now, the experimentation program. So Oliver will start sort of setting the stage, talking a bit about the background about the company Polestar and sort of the customer insights and analytics department that we belong to, and sort of how he got started and then started to establish more of a process for experimentation. And then I'll take over and talk a bit about how we sort of are trying to scale that program today and how our ways forward in doing that and sort of where we have ended up to date, basically. And we'll end on some sort of key learnings from this journey.
I just wanted to give a quick introduction to Polestar, especially for those that may not be aware of the company. Obviously, I think if you're based in Sweden, there's a good chance that you've been inundated with a lot of our marketing, and you've probably seen a lot of the cars on the streets too, especially if you're living in Gothenburg. But as you can see here, we have our first car, the Polestar 1, and we followed that up with a fully electric car, the Polestar 2, which has been available for about 1.5 years, 2 years now. We've also just unveiled or released pictures of our third car, the Polestar 3. We're looking to get that out into customers' hands from next year. So that's really exciting for us at the moment as well. One of the other things that I just wanted to touch on in terms of the context of Polestar is we have a number of different retail experiences. And this is from our space or our retail space. This one's actually in The Hague in the Netherlands. We're a premium electric vehicle manufacturer that was founded in 2017. However, if you're a bit of a car enthusiast, you probably have heard of the moniker before as a race team, but also the tuning and engineering, racing engineering side of Volvo as well. We are committed to or I would say an accelerated commitment to climate impact reduction. You can see that in a number of ways, but I think one of the foremost ways is in the fact that we're now publishing our life cycle assessments of our vehicles, which you're able to compare to other cars or manufacturers that are also doing the same. Unfortunately, I should say at the moment, there are not too many that are actually doing that, but hopefully more in the future to come to give you more, or let's say transparent choices with your purchases when it comes to the automotive industry in the future as well. We just entered 2 more markets recently this year in Spain and Portugal, so that brings us up to a total of 25, which is obviously quite a lot for a young company. So most of our growth is really focused on entering new markets, or it has been and still is at the moment. Like I said and showed you just before, we have a number of different retail space formats, and they really range from pop-ups providing ranging and test drives, temporary pop-ups I should say, and go through to the sort of main retail experience, our spaces, but we also have handover centers, and we have a new format now that is a combination of all of these with the added benefit of a more immersive brand experience in what we call our destinations. And if you're based in Gothenburg, you can see our first one out at Landvetter Airport. Another big distinction, I think, about Polestar within the automotive industry is that we're a direct-to-consumer brand. Obviously, there are exceptions with like large business-to-business orders, for example, Hertz purchasing 65,000 cars from us in the next 5 years. Obviously, that was a bespoke transaction, but the majority of our focus, I should say, is direct to consumer. So there is a shift away from the dealership model and having our customers visit our spaces and then continue to conduct the shopping journey online directly with us. Another thing that I wanted to just briefly address, and I alluded to this before, was the automotive industry and our lead times. On average, I think it takes about 3 to 5 years to get a car from concept to handover, so in the hands of our customers. And we have pretty strict, I would say, timings within that lead time, both obviously from an engineering perspective, and then also the infrastructure to, for example, market and sell those cars, and then obviously provide services after handover in the ownership phase. And these tend to be quite strict, and I think we'll sort of talk about that a little bit more in this presentation or in this webinar. And the last thing I wanted to clarify is just where I sit within Polestar. And if we were to split the business down the middle between the sort of engineering and manufacturing side versus the sort of business side, I'm coming from within the business side, within customer experience. And we have departments like brand and marketing, sales, business strategy and development. And also a big part of our business side is now our digital department. And it's possible you've seen how much that's growing, with a lot of LinkedIn ads going out for all the open positions that we're currently hiring. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. And I just wanted to give that context with it, because I think it really comes back into how we sort of move forward, not only with experimentation, but with the team that I'm actually part of at Polestar. And that team is called the Customer Insights and Analytics team. And we're founded about, I would say, sort of 2 years ago, around the time I joined. And these were some of the sort of founding, I would say, I'd like to call them noble principles, basically, or goals that we had when the CIA was first formed. And I'll just go through this quickly. Firstly, we wanted to really socialize the research and analysis throughout the entire organization, or at least the business side of our organization. We didn't want to restrict ourselves to just working within CX. We wanted to bring all the customer data that we were capturing across the organization. The second principle or goal that we had was to really accelerate insight to action. So not only just measuring, but obviously making use and value of both the data and the insights that we were basically producing from the data that we were capturing. And finally, I think it's important, we really wanted to drive digital customer touchpoint design and optimization. Then this is where the CX kind of comes into these principles. So we really wanted to, first and foremost, maximize our customer experience. And these things, they all sort of flow into the data maturity spectrum. And essentially, in a nutshell, what the CIA wants to do is really push the organization as far along the data maturity spectrum as we can in the towards the right-hand side. It should be noted, in our experience, it's not so much of a reveal, but when we first really introduced ourselves and started working with other teams and other departments, we did really find ourselves working with a lot of people that were apathetic towards data, non-believers if you're working in the data space, but also a lot of people that were aware. We obviously started capturing and measuring a lot of our digital customer experience. So most of the time we're sort of in between data apathy and data aware. On our good days, I would say we're data critical, so we are making key decisions based on data. But I would be, if I'm being honest, I would say there is a ways to go before we're a data-first organization. But that's sort of in a nutshell what we as the CIA were founded upon and what we're striving to do. To give you an understanding, some of you will probably be working in teams that look like this. Others, maybe this is the kind of team that you aspire to grow and foster at your own respective companies. But the CIA has both qualitative and quantitative competencies. We have a lot of people, for example, within customer research roles, and we have feedback specialists looking at all our voice of customer data. And then we also have a really large quantitative side. So people working within implementation, myself working in experimentation. We now have ML and AI specialists, and we have data scientists, and at our core, we have data analysts. It should be said, we didn't have this from the get-go. This is the sort of growth of the CIA over approximately 2 years. So it was much leaner in the early days. The other thing that I want to point out in showing you this is talking about myself with experimentation. It's not something that has been in a vacuum. it's very much being a part of a larger group and being a sort of a tool in our collective tool belt. So it's something that we all, I would say, contribute to in one way or another. It's not something that I've only been working on myself. When we first, or when I was hired, I should say, we wanted to be quite structured and realistic in what we were hoping to achieve with experimentation within the context of the CIA and, of course, the context of Polestar. And these are some of the things that we came up with at the time. And first and foremost, we wanted to establish this sort of reliable and scalable digital experiment capability. It was something that we wanted to grow and have trust in, and people have trust in ourselves in the future, not just something that was here for a time while it was sort of maybe a buzzword or hot. The second thing we really wanted to do was, obviously it relates to the data maturity spectrum. We really wanted to aid in decision making in a variety of contexts. So obviously moving towards a sort of data critical aspect of that spectrum. What we weren't necessarily doing, and we sort of weren't trying to kid ourselves too early, was transform Polestar into an experimentation culture like you see at companies that had championed it and are very well respected for it, like Booking.com or your Facebooks or your Microsofts or your Airbnbs, etc. That kind of transformation is very clearly something that is from a top-down approach and a very concerted effort. We're sort of working in an environment where we're sort of coming from the bottom up, I would say, a lot of the time. So we didn't have this ambition to completely transform the company. I think it's just a good distinction to point out from the beginning. What I wanted to do with this, and I think Daniel promised some memes, so we currently have this butchered CRO meme with various Spider-Mans. I'll let you decide who you think is your favorite. But what I wanted to do with this slide is basically simultaneously talk about how this sort of terminology within experimentation, how these specific ones, CRO, A/B testing, and experimentation, are often used interchangeably. And I just want to bring a bit of clarity to how I see these, but to also give you a bit more context about how we see it at Polestar. Firstly, I think one way that you can really dissect these terms so that you're not just seeing them as interchangeable is to think about experimentation as what you're doing. You're coming up with ideas, or more appropriately, hypotheses, and then you're actually testing these in one way, shape, or form, basically to prove or disprove them. Secondly, you have something like A/B testing, and this is your format for testing your hypotheses, for example. So you're running controlled experiments. And the main distinction I want to make is with your why. Why are you doing this whole process in the first place? And a lot of the time, this is called conversion rate optimization. It has been for a long time, and it's probably the main use of experimentation, I would say, in a business setting. But what we're starting to see, or have been seeing for some time now, is different companies having more than just one why. We're not just looking at conversion rate optimization. We may also be looking at other reasons, like product validation, introducing new features and understanding the effects that they have on your user base. Or it could be for customer experience observation, understanding if you are improving or even making worse the customer journeys that you have set for your customer to undertake. And I'll be honest, at Polestar, we have approached experimentation from a CX mentality first. But this is not to say that we don't conduct experiments or A/B tests, more appropriately, that you would sort of consider more CRO or product validation heavy. I would say it's quite a broad why that we have within our program. And I think that's something that is really important that you consider when you are setting up an experimentation program. You might necessarily have more than one reason for doing it, not just looking at sort of your end conversion rates, for example. We're going to rely on the experiment maturity model throughout the rest of our webinar. I think Per will talk about it more specifically than me, but I just wanted to put it up here now and also add my 2 cents to it. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, it does say start testing, but if you're making a concerted effort to start an experimentation program, I do think you'd have to take some other considerations into account. And I want to go through a few of what those were that we took into account at Polestar, basically. Firstly, is the sort of idea of a KPI framework that you have for running your program. And I'll be honest, we took quite generic KPIs that revolve around velocity and quantity. And I think this is something that is not unusual because in general, the more experiments you run, the more you can learn from both the experiment outcomes and also the process that you're going through that you can iterate on. So it's not really surprising that this is the route that we took. So we were looking at things like the number of experiments, the number of touch points that we were able to experiment on, and then obviously the number of implementations based on the outcomes from those experiments. The top of the list is something called a hypothesis exploration advancement meeting, which is a mouthful. That's why it's been squished into the acronym HEATME. And this was something that was really positive and introduced to us by one of our experimentation partners in the early days. It's essentially a workshop whereby the whole CI&A, collective resources within our large team, we did a lot of research generally around a customer touch point, and then we would package that into a workshop with a number of stakeholders, which would range from product owners down to, not down to, but also include UX designers, and also software engineers, developers. Basically have them come up with their own hypothesis that we would then turn into a roadmap for testing of their touch points, which were very well received. So we added that as a KPI quite early. But this is where we started in terms of KPI and measurement. And if you're not familiar with what's on screen now, this A/B testing flywheel, I really encourage you to take a look at that as well. This was something that was proposed by a number of people that are quite well known in the experimentation worlds, working at Microsoft's experimentation platform as well as Booking.com. And the flywheel is essentially, it's really all about momentum and how you can start testing and then increase your velocity to continue testing into the future, and how you then can then reduce your costs of experimentation, which essentially fuels the momentum for your flywheel to continue. I won't go into depth for the flywheel, but it was also part of the backbone of our sort of KPI framework. It's more of a backstop just to remind us that if we continue doing these activities, we'll benefit from them, basically. It's also good to note, I think, before you start testing, sure, you can do it by yourself. You can get going if you can do implementation, if you're using a client-side experimentation platform, with the WYSIWYG editor, for example, or you may already have coding experience. You can do this in a really lean way. But we were quite fortunate in the fact that we were able to secure a small budget and outsource some key roles to help us basically develop and run our experiments with one of our experimentation partners. Before that, I should say, we did try to recruit resources from within Polestar, but for various reasons, for example, people working on dedicated touch points or within teams, it became very difficult to actually get them into the meetings and then obviously to dedicate their time to designing and developing experiments. So that's why we chose, and we're fortunate enough to have a budget to pursue a dedicated, or I should say part-time dedicated team. It was definitely not 100%. But of those roles that we outsourced, we worked with a front-end developer, a UX designer, and we were also fortunate to have an experiment specialist and analyst that could do most of the quantitative work, but we also had obviously people from the CI&A available to us too. So in terms of implementation, we were very lucky to have a great colleague that was able to help us with our platform, but also measurement for individual experiments too. Fortunately as well, we also had a good network internally at Polestar with copywriting and obviously localization, because we were running experiments in multiple markets simultaneously. So that was very important. We had close ties to be able to accurately localize our experiments to be able to increase our sample sizes, basically. I should also note here, and again, I'll just go through this very lightly because Per will spend a bit more time on it later in today's session. But we pursued a dedicated team to experimentation, as opposed to some of the other models that you can work with. And effectively what that meant was that as a single team, we were servicing multiple digital teams that were then responsible for customer touch points, essentially, to run our experiments on. I think this is a natural way of starting things. And I think Per will talk a bit about that a bit more later as to why. But it was very much the way to go from our perspectives. And the other models that are available, I think they make more sense with more maturity in terms of both your understanding of experimentation and in your organization's ability to run those models. But I'll stop there and I'll let Per talk a bit more about this team structure. The final thing that, or I should say, words of advice that I was given by one of our sort of executive sponsors, if you will, was to ask for forgiveness and not permission. I think this is a fine line to traverse, but we took it practically and we went forward. And that's when we essentially started testing after we had the sort of KPI framework, our goals, and our team structure in place. So we sort of went to town, so to speak, with running experiments over a number of Polestars, digital or customer touch points. And I should also note here now, most of these were on the shop stage of the customer journey. So we weren't looking so much on ownership, which if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense considering Polestar is a young company and we've just launched our sort of first two commercial cars, especially, or one really, if you think about it, the Polestar 2 being the first car that we produced in significant quantities. So it made more sense to focus on the shop journey. In terms of testing areas, we were really all over the place. We were looking at sort of acquisition and activation. We were looking at newsletter signups. We were looking at our test drive booking flow. We were looking at our product description pages. We were looking at, very important to us, our navigation. So also the terminology that we use within in our navigation, for example. We were looking at the logged in area for customers, basically, and the content that they were being served in that area. And everywhere else, we were also looking in our car configurator, obviously quite a large part of the shop journey for us, both the configurator itself and also the sort of peripheral services that are in there, like the chat, for example. And again, going back here to the test drive booking flow, for example. So a lot of different areas, all digital to us, that we were testing on, basically. Now, if you think that's going all over the place a little bit like spaghetti, especially Guy Fieri spaghetti, you'd be 100% correct. What that sort of way of working is commonly referred to in experimentation is spaghetti testing. Basically do it a little bit here, a little bit there, but everything's sort of wrapped around and entwined within itself. And that's exactly where we ended up with our experimentation program at Polestar. We sort of went all out guns blazing and took this approach of don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And this is the direction that sort of came out of doing that. If you think about our initial experience, and this is, by the way, this is the Mars Perseverance rover being dropped on Mars in a very sort of, I guess it would sort of a ballet of engineering, using a drone on the surface of another planet, orchestrated and done to perfection. This was not how we did things initially with our experiment program and how we were received. It was a bit more like the Spirit rover, which, if you remember, was entered the atmosphere and dropped from quite a height and bounced along the surface of Mars before coming to a stop and essentially deflating these cushions and then hoping that the rover itself is still operational, considering the huge investment cost that was to be able to do that. This was a little bit more like our experience, I'll have to admit. Like I prefaced before, our landing zone was the sort of operational and manufacturing realities of the automotive industry. We have these lead times, which are quite significant, 3 to 5 years. But when you get into that last year, especially that last 6 months, you have very specific periods of time and budgets to be able to deliver things like product pages, things like car configurators, all of these services also in the ownership phase of a vehicle. It's quite a short period of time to actually do this. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to running a program of continuous experimentation. The other things we found were that we were trying to sort of land into these fixed roadmaps, like I just mentioned. And then we were also a growing company, going from, I think it was about 500 to 750 people at the time when I joined, to about 2,000 a year later. So a lot of the processes weren't in existence or they were in flux. So it's very difficult to align ourselves with a lot of these teams at times. The other issue that we came up with, and I'm sure a lot of people are in the same situation as us in this regard, is we had a high consultant to employee ratio. It was difficult to really connect with people to work together because they had very specific briefs, to accomplish in a short period of time. Which is obviously, it can be a little bit different from an employee perspective if you're going to be with the company, or at least assumed to be with the company for a longer period. Other hurdles that we faced were a defined brand. This was something that had existed for years before we even landed experimentation and the customer insights and analytics team at Polestar. So things like design language and terminology were quite fixed to some degree. So we had difficulty not working, but obviously changing how those design languages and terminology existed at Polestar. What I'm saying in a nutshell is that we landed on the surface of a company that had a significant immune system, I would say. And there were obviously a number of challenges involved in really sort of pushing ourselves, not with just experimentation, but pushing us towards or along the data maturity spectrum that I alluded to earlier. At the same time, I have to say we did have a lot of genuine support at Polestar, and that's something that's obviously kept us going 2 years later and has really helped us overcome a lot of these hurdles. But after starting testing things that we did to really overcome this rough landing and this immune system, I'll just speak to a few of these, but the first is a lot of work, a lot of elbow grease. And I mean that collectively as the customer insights and analytics team, not just as an experimentation program. Essentially, we worked incredibly hard to not only measure, but bring insights to different parts of the organization. And in doing so, we earned a lot of trust from these different departments or different teams within customer experience. The other thing that we did from quite an early time is share our learnings as broadly as possible. We have a Slack channel that has between 200 and maybe 250 people. Sometimes within a growing company, you don't always know who you should actually be delivering your insights to. So even though we would make a conscious effort to do that, we would also publish everything as if it were a white paper to our 250 Slack channel members as well. And moving on from that, we really focus on cross-functional alignment. It's a really big part of our job. It's something that obviously it takes a tremendous amount of time to not only do it, but to continue to have this alignment. But it's something the entire CINA and including the experiment team does on a regular basis. And we also adjusted our KPIs and documented our entire process. Very quickly, in a nutshell, instead of focusing only on velocity and quantity, we started to look more into quality. Again, a conscious decision that maybe we didn't have to push our velocity and quantity, but we had to take a step back in actually to increase our momentum in the flywheel by delivering reliable experiments, increasing the number of allies or champions or heroes, whatever you'd like to call them, within different parts of the organization, and really upskilling a lot of the existing competencies within other parts of the organization. So developers, UX designers, so that they can basically think about experimentation as opposed to relying on a dedicated team.
So basically where we're at now, we sort of looking into how to, you obviously, I guess, always want to like scale the positive impact that you have. So we're looking into various ways of doing that. So going back to those quantitative KPIs that Oliver talked about. So at the end of last year, it was sort of a natural time to stop and reflect a bit and do a bit of a retrospective. New year coming up, new roadmaps, new budgets, etc. But also the fact that Oliver was leaving for parental leave and me stepping in to cover for him as leading this program further. So we wanted to sort of set some new directions and see how we wanted to scale this basically. And in terms of output, we had since then roughly 1.5 years, about 30 something experiments. And with that means, executed, analyzed, and shared with the wider organization. So some significant, some insignificant, some winners, some losers, but still like 30 plus, like great learning opportunities for the company, but also for us as sort of an experiment program. And that meant like a velocity around like 1.5 tests per month, which I think is pretty decent considering we generally want to run our tests for roughly 4 weeks at least, and somewhere around like 10 touch points involved. So those are sort of the stats at this point sort of reaching that sort of level 2 in the maturity model of the program. But as Oliver said, like we wanted to shift more into qualitative metrics, and in a retrospective we identified like what isn't working with this setup, what do we need to address basically. And one thing, people don't scale well, and expertise was very much contained within a few individuals, basically this centralized team. And that often meant that even though we become better at sort of involving the other teams and not actually asking for permission rather than just forgiveness, still meant that like the UX design and engineering within the product teams were largely excluded, which wasn't really ideal considering what we identified we need to spread outside us as individuals, but then we can't like sideline the people who actually build the products. That also leads into like experimentation in general becoming more of an afterthought. Like it's this parallel process to the actual development. I guess you could say these three together, and leaves us at the fourth one here, which to me I think is the most important one, which is that like the time to implementation could be really long or even uncertain. So even if we have we have a validated design that's a winner, we know that this performs better on these metrics or whatever we're trying to achieve. You come to a team that has like a full backlog and a full roadmap and just ask like, hey guys, can you drop everything and implement this instead? Like that just doesn't work a lot of the time. Either led to really long implementation times, and I didn't even show like the number of implemented solutions or winners, because I mean, frankly, we're still not entirely sure like how much of what we actually did even met production and met our users. So basically we realized that we could continue to increase output and sort of automate more. We sort of automate analysis, more better documentation for onboarding, etc., to speed up that process in terms of output. But like scaling in that direction didn't really make a lot of sense, because we primarily failed in sort of the level 3 stuff here, which is to make measurable impact on key KPIs. Like we realized we needed to do both. We want to scale the program. We also want to sort of step up on this ladder and sort of start attacking level 3 instead of just staying and continuing our output on level 2, because we're not really making that much impact. And it's a bit of a narrative written in hindsight, because another major reason was that we knew going into 2022 that we would no longer have our own resources for development for a bunch of various reasons. So it also sort of forced us to reconsider our ways of working and find like another strategy forward. And what we came up with was to transform into more of a center of excellence. Maybe this is a term that you guys have heard before. Basically move from this central experiment team that serves or sort of basically works in collaboration at best with the actual product teams, to become more of a centralized unit that can support an experiment operation within each dedicated team instead. So here's just like a definition according to Optimizely. I mean, it's one of the largest vendors of A/B testing tooling. So how they define it in terms of experimentation, I mean, this could of course apply to analytics in general or any sort of discipline really. But in terms of experimentation, when they sort of recommends it in the why here, it's when you want to scale and you want to more create a culture of experimentations. That's pretty bang on what we're looking for. We want to scale and we want to be less of this like executive task force and more sort of nurture this culture of experimentation instead. And how that is done is basically, decentralized product teams with their own testing roadmap, as we just saw. So what do we focus on in that scenario? Well, it's more about facilitation, documenting best practices, sharing the learnings, and sort of measuring the output and impact of experimentation as a whole rather than sort of individual experiments. And really how we thought about it is really like classic CRO mindset is to, remove friction and add fuel. That's how you get a rocket into space, kind of. I don't need to go through these, I guess, but basically various ways of removing friction, removing barriers of entry to experimentation to both analysts and product owners or whoever might be interested in this, in just making yourself available really to support them, and also load them up with fuel, like onboard them to the tools, have technical documentation available, also share all the results that you have to sort of inspire and sort of keep the again with the momentum, sort of keep the discussion going and keep the sort of experimentation going really. So really in this way trying to address all these 4 issues that we had identified and spoke about. But then there's the reality comes knocking, and we realized we were the central team, but in reality there's only really one team at Polestar right now that works in this capacity, and it's really sort of the web core team called the .com team, to have their own experiment program where we try to sort of support them more as a center of excellence. But I mean, this isn't really scaling, it's just like a side grade in some way. So returning to that, like the flywheel idea, or anyone who ever made pottery knows, apart from being extremely difficult, you need to sort of kick the pedal to keep the momentum going. We realized like that other teams won't start making pottery. Like we need to keep kicking this flywheel for them to sort of get started and to get in on that momentum, so to speak. So really where we're at now, sort of, we had the vision of becoming more of a center of excellence, and we work in that capacity in some ways. But really, there's two ways forward that we are sort of exploring right now, and this is definitely still, as I said, something that we're trying to explore and understand how we want to do. But we have two paths forward. One is called what we call a structured engagement, and the other is the topic of like insights to action that Oliver already mentioned a bit. But just starting with the structured engagement and what that is basically, you know, collaborating more closely with one of our touch points or one of our product teams for a period of time, sort of almost embedding a bit within their sort of development process. And really what it's about is sort of to fast track them through steps 1 and 2 in sort of a smaller scope to get them started, to feel that they can sort of maybe start to establish their own process and gain some momentum and add to that momentum that the total experiment program have. So that is really, you could say, what it's all about. And basically, we used to do everything through the experimentation process within the central team, but continuously starting to just push over different parts of the process into these teams until they're more and more self-sufficient. So ideally, I guess, starting with design and development, since that is literally something that we can't do. Like, we're not developers, we're not designers. They need to provide that themselves. And really what it looks like, again, returning to sort of this big company with a rapid expansion, it becomes like development often looks a bit like Scrum fall. It's a waterfall that's sort of agile in some ways. So it's like, we have the discovery phase that gets handed over into the design phase, and that gets handed over into the development phase, and then we ship. So obviously this can be months of time depending on what we're building. So the problem here is really like we're really involved in the discovery from customer insights perspective, but A/B testing sort of occurs in development. And like when there's so much time between these two, it's really hard to get experimentation going, especially if they would supposedly be able to do it by themselves, just waking up one day and then suddenly starting experimenting. So really what we're trying to do, we're not really trying to sort of make that process super quick and super small, like that's just too big of a task. So as Oliver mentioned, we have these heat meet, those are already in place. There's a lot of good insight and discovery coming from that. But then sort of being part of the design process and bringing in more of that data and trying to have some sort of iteration even in this phase, even if it's not yet like an A/B test, just to be better at sort of taking early validation and early feedback in those stages, for example, with like polls or usability testing even, or anything that could sort of give some iteration before it's handed over to development, where we ideally then release whatever we worked on an iterator on as an A/B test to actually validate that, we actually solved the issues that we found in the discovery phase. You know, that's really, start testing, really like the level 1 bits. So we're in this transition period. We need to sort of onboard more teams before we can really serve as a center of excellence. Otherwise, it's not really any scaling happening. The second path that we have is the insights to action, which is something that is, as Oliver mentioned earlier, is one of the sort of the goal and purposes of all of Insights at Polestar. And like historically, like the experiment program sort of predated a lot of the other stuff. So it used to be sort of the insights feeding the experiment process through the heat meet format, for example. But as we grow, we think that we can use sort of experimentation as one of the main enablers of the insights to action, which is something that all of Insights want to improve on. So really, that's sort of a shift as the organization grows. And from the classic sort of build, measure, learn, we're really good at measuring, we're really good at learning, but perhaps not building accordingly. So could we use sort of experimentation as sort of the vehicle of taking the learnings into the building phase and sort of connecting development with discovery and design, obviously. So I guess you could summarize it as like an ambition that we're trying out is sort of that, any insight should be packaged then by us as sort of hypothesis with MVP test design suggestions. So like the next step in any research or any insights delivered should also come with like, and we can validate this by doing this and this and this, and then sort of release the best version of the product. And we think also, so this is the customer journey as it's visualized at Polestar. We have sort of the shop phase here in black, step 1 to 6, and then the own phase from step 7 to 12. And that is sort of, when we talk about experimentation, we often talk in like touch point per touch point. It's a bit siloed, also a bit like inside out. We're sort of optimizing within this, how we're organized internally and like how the product team looks like. And that's the scope. So I think this can also be like how we could sort of step to the outside perspective and sort of the meta layer of looking at this from a customer journey perspective instead. Sort of here in stage 6, for example, how to buy, like the purchase step. We need to difficult to buy a car online, like for pretty expensive car, like in an online tool. Like we need to help the customers of how they do that, and that's not necessarily just like the checkout team that should solve. Like it could be maybe the problem is within the product pages. We need to explain better what the different packages and stuff are. Maybe it's a CRM journey where you sort of handhold through different sort of communications on how these steps look, etc. So that is also something that I think this sort of insights to action path could also help sort of, again, get in sort of the CX perspective rather than quotation marks only the product perspective. I mean, both are super important. But yeah. So really, this is far ahead, but it could be that using this path is also something that could push us at a later stage to sort of level 5 to attack those sort of business questions and validate those like more, I guess, larger hypotheses, if you will, rather than more of the product optimization at the product optimization level. Yeah, so all in all, currently sort of where we're at with the we're no longer the centralized team. We're embarking on transitioning into a center of excellence, but currently it's kind of like 3 parallel ways of working at once. We have the structured engagements, insights to action, and the center of excellence, really skewed to the right now, but we're trying to sort of push ourselves against the left, and that is really sort of where we're at and where we're sort of exploring of how to do that. So yeah, that's pretty much what has happened in the last, I guess, 2 years of this experiment program. And the key sort of takeaways from this. Why don't you start with the first one, Oliver?
Yeah, thanks, Per. I think it's really important to define your purpose so that you know what path you want to take initially when you start your experiment program. Sure, you can start experimenting without direction, but I think it makes it more difficult to overcome the initial immune system that you're likely to encounter, like we did at Polestar. But we really kept to our vision, not just the experimentation team, but as the customer insights and analytics in terms of pushing for our principles, pushing for data maturity. And I think if you have something like that to back up what you're doing, even if you might have some naysayers or other natural inhibitors to doing what you're trying to do, it can really help you overcome that immune system for the long term.
How to structure, I guess it's related to the first one with purpose, but think really hard on like how do you structure your experimentation program or team to fulfill whatever the purpose is for the moment or for the foreseeable future. So really, to me, it's really 2 things. You need to be able to deploy and execute, build experiments and execute them, sort of have that. You need to secure those resources to be able to develop stuff that can get pushed in production. And the other thing is to some way have the mandate or be given the mandate to also do it. Because if you don't have that, which leads us into sort of the last piece of important learning from us, is to always focus on keeping that momentum going, because it's kind of like, to paraphrase a bit, like experimentation kind of dies in darkness. Like if you don't, even if you have a bunch, like a great implementation, a great tool, you have all this documentation, you have so many good hypotheses, like if you don't run experiments and have something to talk about and have something to share, you're not going to get that flywheel going. So always sort of not only focus on output all the time, but really important to keep that momentum, because it is this like compounding interest thing that really, it's hard to describe and it's hard to like quantify, but that the more you do it, the faster you grow basically and scale. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for attending and listening in on this. Quickly jump into the questions, and I'll check out the chat here. I can start with I think most will be coming your way, Oliver, but I think of this stats question here. So what kind of statistical models are you using when you're doing your experimentation? Bayesian ? So yeah, we like to present and share according to Bayesian statistics. It's just so much easier and relevant to most people to talk about statistics in that way, especially if you're not like that well versed within statistics. But generally, the kind of data that we have and the kind of tests that we do and the kind of challenges that we have is usually like we generally run like conversion optimization or conversion rate tests, so binomial distributions, which means that you might as well use like an online calculator to do the actual statistical analysis for the significance. So we haven't really done that much advanced statistical or required to do any more advanced statistical calculations than that, really. But yeah, we like to keep the Bayesian just because it's easier to talk about and share. Hope that answers your question.
Adopted experimentation, moved experimentation into actual car interfaces. And I'll just say, no, we haven't done that as of yet. We do collect a lot of in-car data, habits with people using our HMI, for example. But we have been, as I said at the beginning, focusing largely on the shopping experience as opposed to the ownership experience, just for the fact that we have really only in recent time actually started selling and delivering our cars. So it's definitely something for the future and definitely an interesting area to investigate. In terms of some of the other questions, how do we balance or optimizing sales and conversion and also the experience? I think that's a really good question, and that's something that was really at the forefront of our minds when we started experimentation. It was really on balancing those factors, because Polestar, when it was established, we had quite strict rules to not be a very salesy company. For example, business to business wouldn't do unsolicited outbound calls, for example. We didn't buy third-party calling lists, for example. It was really important that we made it as easy as possible for potential customers to be able to interact with us, so that we could obviously continue our conversation with them about purchasing Polestars in greater quantities, as an example. So we really had to balance or draw a line of an activity, say, that wasn't too salesy, it wasn't too focused on conversion rate optimization at all costs. So that's where we really brought into is what we are doing, does that benefit the customer in some way? And I think that's what we had to ask ourselves before we ran any of our experiments. Were we fixing were we removing a hurdle for them to basically continue through the customer journey, especially the shop journey that we've been focusing on? That was at the forefront of our minds, as opposed to just what can we do to increase our sales at all costs. I hope that helps answer the question. Did you see any, Per?
Yeah, I can grab. Yeah, I was thinking about I can try to answer all of them, but the top one. So, do you do experimentation in prototypes as well, or is it strictly in production? So I guess when we had our own team and our own development, it was all production to run like proper A/B tests with our real users using our real product. But I guess it depends on what you mean with the prototype. Back then, we tried to always have this sort of MVP mindset, which I guess you could constitute as a form of prototype, but still it's in production. Right now, when we're sort of trying to get into the actual sort of the real development roadmap of the teams and introduce testing there, we've done some prototypes testing, sort of more on a usability studies and that kind of thing. But the idea is there as well to eventually do the A/B testing within the production environment. That's really how we have been doing it so far, at least.
I can take one to give you a little breather. But I see there was a question related to if we've developed our experimentation program and features to prevent multiple subjects going from treatment to control, for example, and vice versa. And no, we're still actually, originally we started using Google Optimize, the free version, just because we wanted to really push ourselves to use it to its maximum capability, which is mostly around that 5 simultaneous experiment point. There's also other benefits of moving to 360, but that was the main one for us. And so we have been running client-side experimentation just through Google Optimize. So we haven't really had any need as of yet to buy into a more expensive platform or design one ourselves as of yet. But I think it's really something that you have to think about depending on your requirements within your own program. But for us, it hasn't been something that we've ventured into.
Yeah. I guess as probably the webinar content showed, like the biggest hurdle is really to get the decisions made to actually sort of spend time on this, sort of implement and deploy tests, rather than sort of the quality either statistically or technically of those tests. Of course, we want to keep that as high as possible, but that hasn't really been the main challenge for us. And I guess a lot of people starting out experimentation recognize that that feeling as well. Thinking at the next one, thinking of the size of the company and the capacity, is the goal to be data driven? I guess Oliver touched upon this in the beginning, but I mean, in a way, sure, but we also don't like kid ourselves. We can't, as just a few people with like, I don't know how many teams there are in digital right now. Is it like 40 or 50 something? Like we can't be there with all of them doing this and sort of changing everyone's from the ground up in terms of how to work with experimentation or be data driven. So I guess it's more, as Oliver said, to have a reliable way of running experiments, so sort of adding that to the toolkit that is customer insights and analytics. So I guess that's sort of the more in a way less ambitious goal, but more realistic goal. But sure, like of course in the end, like you run tests to be data driven in your decision making. So yeah. Tobias followed up his prototype questionnaire. So if you do experimentation in prototypes, do you require a larger user base leaning towards quantitative numbers? So yeah, I mean it depends on where sort of I showed you the sort of the discovery, design and development phase. Like we're currently trying to sort of support the design phase with for example usability testing, and that is more to, I guess you need to decide what the purpose of the study is, but that is really more to validate that, like, is it usable? Like, do they understand how to use this new design? Do we have some obvious issue with this variant that we're designing? And then like if like 20 out of 20 understands that, yeah, you can click this button, then it's not a like statistically significant result necessarily, but like there's no, then we can be pretty sure that, yeah, it doesn't seem to be an obvious problem. And going into like polls and sort of the gray area between sort of qual and quant, I mean, again, it's more about catching obvious problems that we then want to sort of streamline this design and make it as good as possible to be sort of handed over into development. And that's where we do the real quantitative validation through A/B testing in production. So that's at least the sort of intent of using prototypes together with the actual product in production. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, and I hope you got inspired and learned something, and hopefully can take it to your daily work.